Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. We are continuing our lecture series, our study of a very special book called the Chatzar Yosef, the Courtyard of Yosef. The book is available for anyone who wants. Please email me at my name, yosefzayrov@gmail.com. We can arrange it to almost anywhere in the world. People have only given positive reviews. Be a part of the movement, B'ezrat Hashem. So we are studying, we're on page 99. This is section 2 of chapter 9, the beginning of section 2 of chapter 9. So let me just give you a quick synopsis of what happened in section 1, because this is going to be a build-off of that. Basically, it's during the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, the very end of the Second Temple era. We're talking about 2,000 years ago, okay? And the Jews are besieged. That means they're surrounded completely by the Roman army in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, right? The walls of Jerusalem, the Jews were using the walls to sort of scave away and fight back a little bit. You know, when you have walls, you could defend better. That's how warfare was back in the day. They used to build walls around the cities to protect from invaders. And here, one way to get around that issue, if you're an invader, which the Romans were, was to siege them. So they set up their camp of the Roman army all around the city, the walls, for 3 years. They starved them out. The Jews had a lot of food actually inside. They could have survived, but we learned in chapter 8 that the Varionim, which were like the zealot group, the fighters, the really rowdy Jews that were inside that wanted to fight the Romans, they burnt all of the food, all the wheat. So, and they did it on purpose because they thought that would convince everyone else that we have to go fight them. We have no other choice. So we spoke about that in chapter 8. But the Jews are inside, they're hungry, they are on the brink of death. And the temple is still standing though. As long as the temple is standing, the Jews are fighting. But what happened is, the leader of the Jews, the leader of the religious sector, I should say, or the rabbinic sector of the Jews at the time, was one of the biggest chachamim ever, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was inside, and he wanted to negotiate with the Romans. Now, because of the Barionim again is that rowdy group of Jews that were running everything. They're like the mafia. They were running everything inside. They were running the gates. They were running, by force. They had weapons, whatever it is. The leader of that group his name was Abba Sikra. He was the nephew of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. So they devised a plan together to get Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai out of the city so he can go and negotiate with the Romans. And that's exactly what happened. In section 1 of this chapter, we explained how they devised a plan. They pretended he was dead, and they took him out. Pretty much they got him out. They pretended he was dead, and they got him out. Still a lot more details, a lot more depth, which we spoke about in the previous videos and previous section of this chapter. But now Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's out. He's out of the city, out of Yerushalayim. He gets up out of the box that he was in, and he goes over to the Roman camp. And they have a very interesting conversation. And this is the story of that conversation. Page 99. We're going to just read the English part. When Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, in other words, the Roman camp, he said, "Peace be upon you, king. Peace be upon you, king." Shalom Aleichem, basically. But he called him a king. To who? To Vespasian. Vespasian was the Roman general who was in charge of the military operation at the time. He wasn't the Caesar. He was the Roman general. Vespasian said to him, "You are liable to death. You are liable for 2 death penalties. For 2 reasons you're liable to death," he told him. 1, because I'm not a king, and yet you call me a king. And furthermore, if I am really a king, why didn't you come to me until now? Remember, there were 3 years already sieging them. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "As for that which you said, that I am not a king, in truth, you are a king," he said. "Since, if you were not a king, Yerushalayim would not be handed over into your hand. As it is written," he quotes him a verse from the Torah, from the prophet Isaiah, Yeshaya. It says, "In Lebanon," now again, Lebanon is a modern day country in the northern of Israel, but the word here is really Lebanon, And Lebanon is a nickname, so to speak, for Yerushalayim.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and,
Is that why they called it Lebanon, though?
perhaps. I'm not sure why they call the actual country, the modern day country, Lebanon. Perhaps. And Lebanon will fall by an adir. Adir means a mighty one, a powerful one. Usually describes like a king-like figure.
Yeah.
And he says, and mighty one means only a king. As it is written in another place, this is in Jeremiah, and his mighty one shall be from his midst. So it gives him proofs from the verses that the only way that you could be here taking over Yerushalayim is if you must be a king. A mighty one. And then he explains more about what he said. And Lebanon, the term Lebanon, it means only the temple. It's referring to the temple that stood in Yerushalayim, the temple. As it is stated, because there's a verse in Devarim that Moshe Rabbeinu said, the good mountain and the Lebanon. And when he was saying that, he was talking about what good mountain? The mountain upon which the temple was going to stand eventually. And as for that, so you can look at note 1. We explain all these things. No, let's go further. That's talking about Adir. Let's go further.
What's talking about Adir? The verse 1?
Yeah, note 1 is talking about the term Adir, how Adir means mighty one and mighty one means a king. Okay, we're going to go, it's a side point. Gemara says further, and as for that which you said, so now Rabbi Yochanan Zakai is saying back to Vespasian, as for that which you said, the second thing you said, that if I am a king, why didn't you come to me until now? The answer to that, he says, is that the Baryonim, the Zealots, those gangster-like group, that are amongst us, meaning in the city, did not allow us to leave. That's the excuse he gave. I couldn't come to you. They didn't let me leave the city.
It's not the truth.
It was true.
Wasn't his father, his nephew, the leader of that?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that. No, again, just because he was the leader, they were on opposite sides of the spectrum, political spectrum. They made a plan in secret to get him out.
But in reality, they're in opposite sides.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So, as Vespasian said to him, something very interesting. He gives him a mashal, a parable. He says, if there is a barrel of honey, okay, and you have a drakon is probably related to the word dragon, but here, look at number 2, it means a snake, a serpent. Call it a snake. We're going to use the term, drakon. But the simple explanation is, according to Rashi, the snake. You have a barrel of honey and you have a drakon that's wrapped around it, wrapped upon it. Wouldn't they break the barrel bishvil hadrakon, which means on account of the drakon? That's what he said to him. Does that make sense to you, Afrash?
If there is a barrel of honey,
and a drakon wrapped around it, wouldn't they break the barrel
yeah,
on account of the drakon?
it's possible to break the barrel.
Well, let's see. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent. Didn't answer. Rav Yosef, and some say Rabbi Akiva, later, meaning when they were speaking about it, they weren't there at the story. Just when Rav Yosef, or some say Rabbi Akiva, told the story over in the yeshiva, right, the Gemara records this, they read the following verse upon Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the situation. Turns wise men backward and stultifies their knowledge. This is a verse in Yeshaya. Stultify means to stunt, to reduce, to hold back. That's a verse talking about sometimes wise men turn their knowledge backwards, or they turn off their knowledge for a second. Why is he saying this verse? He's trying to explain, he's applying it to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai being silent. Why was he silent in response to Vespasian's weird parable? He says this verse, he turns wise men backward and stultifies their knowledge. The Gemara says further, which means he should have said in response to him. He should have responded. So the telling him we should have answered. Should have said that in such a case we take tzavta. What's a tzavta? Tongs. You know tongs? The big tool you use when you
Especially.
shashlik, yeah, to take hot things. We take tongs, tavta, and remove the dragon and kill it and leave the barrel intact. That should have been the answer to Vespasian's weird parable. According to Rav Yosef, some say Rabbi Akiva. That's the Gemara. A lot of detail. A lot that needs the explanation. What does this parable mean? What does it mean? There's a barrel of honey, and there's a dragon, a dracon, which means like a serpent-like creature around it. You're going to break the barrel.
Yeah, it's very simple.
What do you mean? How do you understand this? If you don't mind, it's recorded. But if you don't mind giving your thesis.
Isn't the barrel, is it possible, maybe I'm misunderstanding, isn't the barrel basically the wall that the Jews are in? And the dracon around it is the Romans? And he's trying to say that it's a possibility that we'll break it, that will break you, basically. Can we understand it like that?
I'm not going to respond to that just yet.
Because
Because this next whole chapter, or this section, is going to be centered on this parable, this dracon and honey and barrel situation, to figure out what it is. And there's going to be a few different opinions.
But why was he quiet?
That's another question. Why didn't he answer him? Why didn't he answer him? Did he know the answer? Did he not know the answer? Did he really stump him? What did Rav Yosef mean later by saying this verse upon him? Turns wise men backwards? Let's see.
Were they there, Rabbi Yosef?
No. Later on, when they were sitting in the yeshiva and they told this story over, right? Rav Yosef taught this about him. He said, this verse applies to him in that situation.
How does he know that?
That's his opinion. He says,
I got it.
he's explaining what happened to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai over there. It's this verse, that it turns wise men backwards, stultifies their knowledge. He should have said this and this and this. And then the people who are writing the Gemara, they wrote down Rav Yosef's commentary on that story, because they were right there with him. Okay?
Yeah.
Because the story actually happened way before the Gemara was written. The story that we're talking about, Rabbi Yochanan, way before the Gemara was written. So now let's look at Rashi, top of page 100. Nice even number. Rashi says, he's going to explain piece by piece from the Gemara. The first piece he wants to explain is when Vespasian said, I am not king. Remember? He says, I'm not king, you can't call me king. And by calling me so, you have derided me. Derided means you have disrespected. You have degraded me, which means, bottom line, you can't call someone else the king. Because if there's a real king and you're calling someone else the king, you're basically committing treason. Next Rashi, in truth, you are a king, right? That's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him. You are a king. What did he mean by that? Rashi explains, you are to be a king in the future. As we'll see in section 3, by the way, that's what actually happens.
He becomes the king.
He becomes the king, but that's for another time.
And the
Section
rabbi,
3.
so you're trying to say the rabbi knew that. So then the rabbi knows that the temple will be destroyed.
Let's see.
What's the purpose of him going? It's
Let's
so
see. That story is on page 106. We'll get there. Let's focus on this part of the story first. Next Rashi, Lebanon is the temple. Why? Because it is malbin. Same word, Lebanon, malbin, same root. Malbin means to whiten, to bleach something, right? Malbin. It whitens the sins of Israel through the temple service. That's one of the purposes of the temple, is that it cleans the sins, it whitens. That's why it's called Lebanon, the whitener, white out. Okay?
Gotcha.
Next Rashi, wrapped upon it. The dracon is wrapped upon it. What does it mean? Rashi says, meaning it is eagerly clinging after it. It's excited and it's clinging on the barrel. Okay. We're on page 100. You can do the story to yourself. Next Rashi, wouldn't they break the barrel? Right? This is what Vespasian said. Wouldn't they break the barrel on account of the dracon? Says Rashi, what does it mean? In order for the dracon to go away, break the barrel in order for the dracon to go away.
Break the barrel in order for the dracon to go away.
That's how Rashi is explaining the parable. So too, says Rashi, you, in other words, the opposition against the Baryonim in the city, because they were talking about the Baryonim. That was where the conversation left off of. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told them, I couldn't come to you all these years because the Baryonim didn't let me.
Yeah.
So then, Vespasian responded with this parable, and he's telling him, the Baryonim in the city so too, you mean the opposition, you guys who were against them, your group was against them, right? You rabbis. What you should have done is you should have broken the wall of the city and burnt it in fire to send away the Baryonim from the city. To send away the Baryonim from the city. That's how Rashi explains it. This is a very difficult Rashi, as we'll see when we analyze it. Hard to make it fit in, but we'll see. The next Rashi, and left the barrel intact. So then this is the answer that the later rabbis said that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai should have said. They said, we take a tzavta. The answer is you take a tongue, you remove the drakon and leave the barrel intact. Don't break the barrel. Says Rashi, our hope was perhaps we could endure the baryonim, we could take them, and take them out of the city whilst upholding the city walls intact. Right? And then we will make peace with you, the Romans. That's what the answer meant. Meaning we didn't want to break the wall. We didn't want to destroy the city. We thought we could save the city and then also be able to negotiate with you. That's how Rashi explains it. Okay, now let's start to explain some of our questions. Sha'ar Chatzar. These questions really have to get under your skin. Let's see if we can do that. Why did Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai repeat his greeting to Vespasian twice? You notice that? When he came to him, he said, Shalom Aleichem. Malach, Melech. Shalom Aleichem Melech, excuse me. Twice he said to him. Hello, peace be upon you, king. Why twice? That's question number one. Question number two.
This in like a previous chapter. One rabbi, there was rabbis arguing whether or not they should stand up for him.
That was on Hoshana Rabbah.
But he also said it twice.
He said it twice there too, yeah.
He said peace be upon you, or he
yes, Shalom Aleichem, peace be upon you. That's something like he's referencing a different chapter that we studied. Okay. Next question. What is the meaning of this enigmatic parable? What's enigmatic mean, Roni?
Enigma is like a riddle.
Yeah, like mysterious. Parable offered by Vespasian involving the drakon and the barrel of the honey. What does each part of the parable, of the example he gave, represent, and what message was he trying to convey? Rashi's explanation that the barrel is to be broken so that the snake should go away seems difficult. Since how would breaking the barrel make the snake go away? Think about that. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, the open access to the honey after breaking the barrel may attract the snake even more. Right? In the parable, in the world of the parable, it seems like the snake is attracted to the honey and he wants the honey. So when you open it, when you break it, you expose the honey. Mm-hmm. Isn't the snake going to get what he wants? It's going to stick around. Perhaps. That's something to think about. Next question. Why did Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the spiritual and intellectual leader of the whole generation, go silent? Why couldn't he answer? Our Gemara makes it seem like there was a divine interference with his ability to respond. How does it make it seem like that?
Divine interference?
Yeah, like heaven interfered.
Like it wasn't his choice?
Yes, like they kept him quiet on purpose, sounds like. Why? Because the verse that they say upon him is... He who turned, the verse is talking about God and what God does, as we'll see later. God basically, heaven, turns wise men backward and stultifies their knowledge. Sounds like somebody intervened and turned off his brain for a second from heaven, and that's why he kept quiet.
Thanks it is.
If so, if that's true, is that not an issue of heavenly interference with free will? Meaning the question is, that one of the basic principles in Judaism Torah is that human beings have free will. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's plenty of proofs in the Torah for that, and it's a basic fundamental truth in Torah and Judaism. So if people have free will, that means you have the power to do whatever you want. Every decision you make is yours. And that means that if your free will generally cannot be interfered with. If heaven interferes with your free will and makes you do a mitzvah, you can't get a reward for that. If they interfere with your free will and make you do a sin, you can't get punished for that.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a problem with that. You can't say that heaven interfered with somebody's free will. There are certain cases where it's done, but that's for a different discussion. That's when it's talking about a macro situation, about Mashiach coming, something like that, and world affairs. That's something else. That's in God's hands, world affairs. But for individual things, you can't interfere with free will. So if they came in and turned off his brain for a second and made him silent and unable to answer, isn't that a problem of interfering with free will?
Yeah.
That's something we have to think about.
Very good question. But we already got to the bottom of this.
Why? How?
Isn't the world a paradox?
There are many paradoxical things in Torah. That's true, but we need to explain them the best we can. Is this one of them? If so, we have to explain it. Next question here: if our Gemara has to quote two sources for something, right? Rav Yosef and Rabbi Akiva, right? Because remember, the end of the Gemara said that Rav Yosef said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and some say that Rabbi Akiva said this verse, that he turns wise men backwards. So if it's going to say these two sources, wouldn't it have been more appropriate to cite Rabbi Akiva first?
They're not sure about Rabbi Akiva.
Since he was an earlier generation than Rav Yosef.
I would say because they're not sure, that's why.
Rabbi Akiva is a Tana, Rav Yosef is a Amorah. So if that's the case, if you're going to quote something in the name of one of them, they don't know which one or not. They weren't sure about Rav Yosef either. They said him, and some say him.
Rav Yosef, and some say.
That means it was either or. It means they're not sure who it was.
I thought it was like Rav Yosef for sure, and then some say.
No. It's either or.
Okay.
So that's the case. Rabbi Akiva has to be mentioned first. He was the earlier source. That's just a technical question. There's an order of operations in Torah of who you quote first.
So they put it on purpose.
Right. So the question is why? Why is Rabbi Yosef mentioned first?
It's the same opinion.
The point is that there's no argument between them. It's just the source they forgot, or it was unclear who the source was. Some say it was Rabbi Yosef, some say it was Rabbi Akiva. Fine. So if there's a doubt who it was, Rabbi Akiva should be mentioned first because he's earlier.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Okay.
I see that.
Next question: what is the significance of the verse? Very important verse, Yeshaya 44:25, which is the whole thing that we kept saying, that he turns wise men backwards and stultifies their knowledge. What is the importance of that verse in the context of our Gemara? You'll see that it's very, very important, and we based our whole thesis off of that, as we'll see. Lastly, why does the answer offered by Rabbi Yosef and or Rabbi Akiva involving tongues specifically, rather than any other instrument that could be used to remove the theoretical dracon from the barrel?
I know the answer.
Why tongues? Why can't you take a pitchfork, or I don't know, an arrow, or a spear?
I know the answer because we went over it, but
So don't give the answer.
No, but I would have had the
Hold
same
on.
answer. I had the same answer.
Well, you're a tzaddik. What can I say? Baruch Hashem.
Looks like he meant it.
But the Gemara is specific in its answer that it wants to offer to Vespasian's parable, and the answer is you have to take tongs and remove the snake. Why tongs? That's our question.
Why that particular instrument?
Yes.
Specifically.
Yes. All right, so that is the bulk of the questions there. Now we're going to delve into some of the...
Let's answer it, man.
So to get the real answers, the real satisfying answers, you got to wait till you get to the Chatzar yourself, which is going to be maybe next week or the week after.
There better be an answer. I don't want to know that taka, whatever that.
Teiku. No, there are answers, but you have to keep coming every
By
week.
the way, I have something to tell you.
Okay. So first, we have to give the proper due respect to the Chachamim that came before us, who offered their explanation of the Gemara, and we're going to learn things along the way from there as well. Because what I did was, I would write all the information first, all the, the Amudei Chatzar and then the Chatzar Yosef section, which was my explanation of it, and then I'd go back and tweak the questions to make sure they correspond with what I write later.
The question.
Yeah, I went back to the questions at the end of every.
You wrote the questions around the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because
So the book doesn't have these questions, these arguments. What do you mean you wrote the questions?
no, what do you mean? I did write the questions. What are you asking? The Gemara doesn't have the Gemara doesn't write these questions.
That's what
No, these are my questions.
Okay.
Okay. Amudei Chatzar. Let's see some Tosafot. Tosafot says, bottom of page 100.
So wait, the answers were already given. The questions is what you came up with.
No, I came up with everything.
and the answers.
Yes.
And how do you know the answers? You went into other books?
Yes, and also I offered my own
He uses
humble
some
answers.
commentaries too, like
I bounce off the commentaries, but I also, sometimes the commentaries don't answer every question, and sometimes I don't like their answers.
So is this your opinion as answers, though?
Yes, it's my humble opinion. You don't have to agree with me.
Oh,
But if you disagree, you have to come up with a better answer. That's how it works in Torah. You can't just say, "Oh, I disagree."
So no one-
Why? Just because.
So in reality, you're the only one that has written answers to these questions.
No, some of the other Chachamim here also have, and I read it. I bring it. If they did. So Tosafot says, this is Tosafot the Dibur Machil Ilav de Malka. So it's over there on that page in the Gemara, Gittin 56b, I believe. Yeah. So Tosafot says, even though Yerushalayim was not completely given over to the hands of the Romans until Titus came along, immediately afterward. Who was Titus? Titus was the son of Vespasian. So we'll see, I don't want to give too much away, but in the next section we'll see Vespasian had to leave the scene immediately. And he nominated his son Titus to finish off the military, job of...
Leave the scene that he was managing, basically.
Yeah, managing, which is the army.
The army.
Right outside Jerusalem. He had to go back to Rome. Vespasian,
Titus finished that
yes,
war, basically.
exactly. That's what he did, and he's the one who's known for the full destruction, as we'll see in chapter 10. So again, Tosfot says, even though Yerushalayim was still not completely given over to the hands of the Romans until Titus came along immediately afterward, nevertheless, since Vespasian had already laid siege on Yerushalayim for 3 years, he was leading the operation for 3 years already, laying siege, which means he was there around, setting up their camp around, and choking the city that way. And there was great famine. It was considered as if the city had already been given over to the Romans. And so it was appropriate for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to call Vespasian king. He was basically king enough. And that's why the bottom line, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did not lie. He didn't lie. What?
He did the job.
He had a mate, exactly. He did most of the job, an important part of the job. Look at note number 3. In other words, Vespasian is considered the true conqueror of Yerushalayim and the temple, not his son Titus, according to Tosfot. Despite the fact that Titus was the one who took control of the campaign and actually broke through the walls and pillaged Yerushalayim and the temple. That is why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai recited the verse, and Lebanon will fall by a mighty one about Vespasian and not Titus, right? He said that about Vespasian. Titus was not the king at the time he overtook Yerushalayim, but Vespasian, for all intents and purposes, was considered the king even before he was actually appointed as king in Rome, which we'll see in the next chapter. Because he led the 3-year siege, just as we'll explain here. Okay, that's the Mitzvah David explanation. Next one, Maharal. Says the Maharal, top of page 101. The word mountain, Har, in the verse Devarim 325, which was brought in our Gemara, right? This is a verse that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to Vespasian. He said that Yerushalayim is called Hahar Tov Lebanon, which means the good mountain and the Lebanon, the whitener, as we said, because it whitens the sins through the sacrifices. It refers to the land of Israel, says Maharal. Just as a mountain is separate from the land in its great height, so is the land of Israel separated from all other lands in its great height. But it is not complete. He's talking like spiritually. Mm-hmm. But it is not completely separated, just as a mountain is also not completely separated from the land, right? The mountain is not hovering over the land. It's still connected to the land, since the mountain is still considered land after all. Meanwhile, the word Lebanon refers to the temple, the Bet HaMikdash, because Lebanon is completely separate from the land. It is not considered a part of the land. It's just attached to it, but it's not a part of it. In the same way, the temple stands on the land and is thereby not a part of the land itself, but just attached to it. Thus, according to its greatness, it is only fitting that a king overtake Yerushalayim and the temple, right? Since a king too is separate from the rest of the nation, he's elevated in that sense, and therefore it had to be a king who would come and take over an elevated piece of land which is or structure, which is the Beit HaMikdash.
And no forces, the Maharal is referring to the trees that grow on the mountain, which are called Lebanon.
What are you reading? Oh, note 4. Yeah, side point. We can go on. Maharsha. Says the Maharsha, the reason that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai doubled his greeting to Vespasian, right? He's offering an answer to that question. Why did he say twice, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem? Is because it was customary to do so when greeting kings. As in the story in the Gemara on page 62a, which is, chapter 30, which is what you were talking about. Over there also, there's this Talmid Chacham who was greeted. He greeted other Talmid Chachamim with a double greeting. Shalom Aleichem. That's the way you would greet a king and also a Talmid Chacham. That was the custom. Were it not for this explanation of Rashi, says Mahasha, I would have said that by calling Vespasian king, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was diminishing the honor of the current Caesar. Right, that's what we said before. Rather than diminishing Vespasian's honor. Yeah. So, what happened here was basically Rashi gave an explanation for why it was a bad thing for him to do that. Why was a bad thing for Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai to call him king? And Rashi said because he was degrading Vespasian, which is weird. I mean, if I call you a king, you feel degraded? That's hard to understand. That's why Maharsha comes along with the language. If it weren't for Rashi, I would have said this. No, he doesn't know how to explain Rashi.
Let's say your dad was a king. If someone comes up to you and calls you a king, if you have respect for your father, you would take that as disrespect.
Yeah.
So you're saying because the Vespasian honored his own king so much, loyally, when someone called him king, he felt like, whoa, what are you talking about? I'm not the king.
By him accepting that is as if he's disrespecting the actual king.
That's what Maharsha says. Maharsha says by him accepting that, it's like you're that's what Maharsha says. That makes sense. But Rashi didn't explain it as much. You said, by saying that you're dissing Vespasian. And that was hard to understand. And so that's why Maharsha said it in that language. You see, look at note 6. We often find that later authorities, like Maharsha is a later authority than Rashi. We often find that later authorities use the language of, were it not for the explanation of so-and-so sage of the earlier generation, aka Rashi, I would have said blah, 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 right? They preface their words this way as a cushion in order to stay within the rules of engagement of Torah study, as we explained it before, which means Maharsha is a acharon, he's a later rabbi. He's more modern, right? So he's like in the 1700s. Rashi is in the 1100s. He's a Rishon. He's much more authoritative. So when a later rabbi doesn't understand an earlier rabbi, his explanation of a Gemara or something like that, the later rabbi would say, were it not for his words, I would have explained it this way. But now that he said what he said, I might be wrong.
Yeah, but
you understand? They have so much respect to him, which is proper. Because they're saying that Rashi saw something that I don't see. If it wasn't for Rashi, I would have explained the Gemara this way. But Rashi said that it's a diss to Vespasian, not to the king.
To Rashi's explanation?
Not really. That's left.
But why would Rashi leave it like that?
What was this?
Listen, Rashi wrote a lot, and he calculated all his words. But he was a human being at the end of the day, and there's plenty of arguments throughout books and books and books of what does Rashi mean. Yeah, man. It's amazing. Not only Rashi, Rambam. You see all that whole shelf behind you? The middle two shelves over there? It's just explaining opinions on the Rambam. What does the Rambam mean? Forget the Gemara. What does the Rambam mean? Right? It's all steps. That's how it is. And then you have modern rabbis trying to figure out what did he say when he was explaining the Rambam who's explaining the Gemara. What did he mean? I didn't get him. It's a beautiful chain, a beautiful artwork.
And it's not going to stop.
That's what it is, Baruch Hashem. Who knows? Maybe in 100 years, someone's going to read this book and say, "What did this guy mean when he wrote this thing over here?"
You're going to have
Okay. So, next part in the Maharsha regarding the verse. We don't have a minyan, unfortunately. Let's go a little further.
We're going to have a minyan?
Let's wait until we get one.
We're not going to.
Wait 5 minutes. Regarding the verse, Devarim 3:25, when it says the mountain, Ahara Tov, referred to this mountain that is referred to in the Gemara is Mount Moriah, Hara Moriah, which was chosen for good from the times of the Avot already, from the patriarchs of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Right? Look at note number 7. Each of them, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, had a special interaction with that mountain. That is where Abraham bound Yitzchak on the altar. Har Moriah, right? That's where you put him up. And that is where Yaakov had his special dream of the ladder to heaven as well. So it's a very special mountain. That's what Hahara Tova Lebanon means, according to Marasha. That's where the Beit HaMikdash was going to be built.
Do you mind if I put this in the refrigerator?
Go ahead.
Because this is crazy.
The Lebanon refers to the building of the temple on this mountain, since it was built from Lebanon wood as well. So Lebanon is also a name of a tree. The name of a tree. So maybe there's a lot of Lebanon trees up in Lebanon. I don't know. But it's the name of a tree. It also is the term used to describe the temple because it's a whitener, like we said, it whitens the sins. Also, because of the word Lebanon, because the word Lebanon is very closely related to the word binyan, which means building.
What was Lebanon again? Mighty one.
Whitening. No, whitening. White. The word Lavan. Lavan means white.
Then what was the mighty one?
Adir.
Oh, I dear.
Yeah. It's also related to the word malbin, as it was explained. Whiten, as Rashi explained, because it whitens the sins.
Lebanon was another word for Jerusalem. That's what you said.
What I meant was to the temple. That's the word for temple, yeah. The temple.
So the white one meaning the holy.
The temple which whitens the place. It whitens everything by whitening the sins. Let's read the last paragraph in the Maharsha, where he's going to try to explain the parable of Vespasian, and then we'll go further from there.
What page is it on?
That's right, same. Right, we're the Maharsha 101, going into the right column. Regarding Vespasian's parable, right, Rashi's explanation is indeed difficult. Right, they have a problem with Rashi's explanation because Rashi said you break the barrel so that the Rakon goes away. Why would it go away by breaking the barrel? So rather, the Maharsha is going to give his own explanation of the parable. You can't explain Rashi's, I'm going to give my own. Rather, the explanation of the parable is as follows. Top right column of 101. Honey is one of the types of liquids which is halachically forbidden to consume if it was left exposed and unattended. Rabbi Lacham Shulchan Aruch talks about this. Things that are asur because of gilui. They're all at a wedding. I have to just finish this. Things that are asur because of gilui, meaning if at the time of the Chachamim, if you left a cup of water out, or even just a cup of honey.
Now too, no?
No, now it's much more lenient. But halachically, kabbalistically is the same. But halachically, it's much more lenient. Why? You weren't allowed, if you left a cup of water out for a certain amount of time, unattended, and it was exposed, you're not allowed to drink it. Why? Because there's a concern that maybe a snake came out from under the cup or on the handle, came out, and it spit its venom and ran away. As long as however much time that takes to happen, if that was exposed for that long, it's asur to drink it. Wow. Same thing, honey, at those times. Nowadays, we don't have snakes, so you don't have to be so stringent on this law.
I mean, I heard.
I can leave water unattended now at home?
If you really wanted to, yeah. But lechatchila, especially according to Kabbalah, the snake can still spit its spiritual venom, if you know what I mean, in there. So Kabbalists are still very careful by this. If it's exposed,
also spit its spiritual thing through the pipes.
Sure, spiritual pipes. Yeah.
I heard, was trying to the reason, why we need honey. It comes from a non-kosher animal. It's the only thing that comes from a non-kosher animal we're allowed to eat. So, and it also has an interesting property that, it's like if a bee's leg gets stuck in honey and it breaks off, it makes it you can still eat the honey.
That's if there's a piece of the bee's leg. Yeah, if it's the whole bee's there, it's a problem. Let's go forward. I don't want to get too sidetracked. I just want to finish this piece because people are waiting for Arabit. So again, honey is one of those things. If it was left out, it's a problem halachically. So honey is one of the types of liquids which is halachically forbidden to consume if it was left exposed and unattended, out of fear that a snake may have come along and emitted some of its poison into it. The parable is that a drakon, which is a snake, is wrapped around the barrel until its opening, to the top of it, at the point where it can emit its venom into the honey. And Vespasian meant that surely it would be worth it to lose some of the honey via breakage of the barrel, by breaking the barrel, upon trying to strike and kill the snake. Which means you're trying to kill the snake, and if you break the barrel by doing that, so be it. And if some of the honey is damaged by that, so be it. You still saved a lot of it. That's his point of it. So in the parable, the baryonim are the snakes. The baryonim are the snakes. says the Marasha.
The Baranim.
The Bayonim who were inside the city, not letting them go and negotiate. The Marasha says it was the Bayonim who were the snakes. And the city walls are akin to the barrel, right? The city walls are the barrel, the walls of the barrel. And the city's contents, the people inside, these precious people, are the honey. That's how he explains it.
So break the walls and leave the people.
So he's saying, you guys, Rabbi Yochanan should have gathered some people and tried to break that snake. Who was that? The Baryonim. And if some of the walls break, by doing that, so be it. This way, at least you could have survived.
But how would you have survived?
Which means because you removed the Baryonim. Remember.
But what does the Baranim? The Romans still wanted to destroy them.
They would have overtaken the city and they would have just took power and control. They wouldn't have to destroy everything. They would took power and control.
And we would have still had the temple, you're trying to say?
Yeah.
The temple would have been destroyed?
It could have been stood up. It was only destroyed because there was war. If the Jews surrendered, if we surrendered, okay, fine, that's it, take us. They would have kept it. Why would they destroy it? It was a beautiful city. It was an amazing structure.
How do you know it would have been for the Jews though? They would have kept the temple, but they would have took control of the temple.
But the Romans don't know how to. Up to that time, for many years, the Romans were still in power. They didn't overtake the temple. They did. There was corruption, but there was still. At that point, towards the end of the era, there was a lot of corruption. But as long as the building stood, there was hope that it could be fixed. Because that happened once already by the first Beit HaMikdash and the Greeks. The Greeks corrupted and took over as well. But since it was still standing, we won the war and we overtook, and we took the temple back and we re-sanctified it. We did Chanukah Mizbeach, it's the whole celebration of Chanukah.
The first one wasn't as destroyed that bad as it should.
It was when
it's different eras, different times. They occupied it, but they didn't destroy the temple.
Gotcha.
And then we won the war, we took the temple back, it was still standing, and we re-sanctified it. That's the story of Chanukah. Right? So as long as it stood, there was hope, that's the point. So let's go further here. So Vespasian meant that they should have tried to kill the Baryonim, even if it meant losing the structure of the walls somewhat, and some of the people inside, some of the honey. The rebuttal that our Gemara offered means to say that they hoped to get rid of the Baryonim without sacrificing and damaging the walls of the city. Right? That's what they removed the tongs. We wanted to carefully remove the tongs, the Baryonim. We didn't want to destroy the city, we wanted to do it carefully. That's the answer that the Maharsha gives. Last point he says that it was the fault of the sinful generation, that Hashem turned the wisdom of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai backward. So he says, yes, Hashem did it. Hashem made him silent, not answer. And why? Because of the sins of the people. That's what the Maharsha says. Beseder. We're going to go forward next week with Hashem to investigate this a little bit more. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen.